Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Aeon 14 podcast. My name is James S. Aaron, and I'm joined by the Aeon 14 team, including our illustrious leader, Michael Cooper. We'll be talking about all things Aeon 14, from the books, the science behind the series, the ideas, the cool stuff, the sad stuff, and whatever else you, the readers, would like to hear about. I think we've done enough introductions at this point. We could run through real quick everyone who's here, and if we can. Are we going to have the quad view up, or I don't know? I'm James. I'm here.
It's multi-view this time.
Okay. So Michael is here. Lisa, Jen, Andrew, and Jenny is calling in from Taiwan, right? Or
yeah,
where are
that's
you?
right.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's right. Can you
That's
hear
right.
me?
Awesome. Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't write that down. I shouldn't wing things. So let's see. Today we're talking about our favorite tech in the series, or favorite tech in general that might have influenced writing about the series. And so this is something we'd love to hear from folks later on in the Facebook group. If you've got special tech that excited you, or maybe that was a thing that got you excited about Aeon 14, we would love to hear about it. And then maybe we'll write more about it. Who knows? But before we get into that, Michael, I think it's time for updates. Do you have the publication schedule coming up? And then
I do, yep.
Swag to talk about too.
One thing that's changed in the publication schedule is that Deathmark won't be coming out on August 2nd. We're going to have to move that one a little bit later. So it's the second time I've had to move a pre-order. Now there's two. I can't just say it was a one-time occurrence. I'm sorry about that. But following, of course, before that, this Thursday comes Carthage, which I'm pretty stoked about. The first 3 bit readers have already got back to me saying they loved it, so that was pretty cool. So Carthage, and then after that, on the 12th, is the Proteus Bridge, which James has been putting together, and I've been going through it as well. And I gotta say, the first 50 pages takes place from the point of view of a parrot, which I think is fantastic. It's like I was like, is this going to be interesting? But it was really good. It was really engaging. And the fact that there's ravens too. I love ravens. I think they're like fantastic animals, like the way they're like obsessed with shiny objects, and they like form relationships and stuff like that with people. So there's that that's coming shortly afterward, and then following the Proteus Bridge will be Proxima Centauri, with possibly the most sinister, evil bad guy that Aeon 14's ever had, courtesy of Lisa's twisted mind. And then after that is Fallen Empire with Tanis and crew, and then Tanis Operative and Tanis Blackest Night come out after that. So it's a lot of stuff. And then I've also put up the pre-order now for the next Jessica book, Surreptitious Rescue of Friends and Foes. That's way harder to say out loud than it is to write. Actually, it's pretty hard to write too, to be honest. I spell surreptitious correctly every time. I can't spell other words like deceptive properly, as Jen knows, but I can. I wrote when I did, so the segue now into the art book that's coming out, hopefully just in a couple of days. I wrote a lot of the text in Photoshop, and Photoshop is, at least for me, it's very jerky when you're writing text, and it doesn't always pick up all the letters. Mm-hmm. And I also transpose letters a lot, and Word fixes all of that for me, and Photoshop doesn't. So there was some rather amusing typos that I had made in that Jen found.
My favorite one was subsequently.
Yeah, I don't know what that was.
SUBSCRQ.
Yeah. There were entirely new letters added to that word. I go through keyboards pretty quickly. Like I wear out keyboards. I haven't learned how to. I got some really fancy keyboards. I haven't learned to write on them properly yet. So I'm using a Microsoft Ergo keyboard, and I burn through one of these things probably like every 3 or 4 months too. Like this one, the left space bar is pretty much gone now. I have to like hit it just right for it to work.
Wow.
There's one keyboard I really like, but the problem is that their keys keep dying on me as well. So it's just like, maybe I'm just too hard on keyboards is what the end result might be. Although I think most keyboards probably aren't made for people who write like 1 to 2 million words a year.
Are you typing like a Muppet where you're like...
That might actually be happening too. Just a lot of this. A lot of Kermit.
That might explain it.
So the art book came about because a lot of the fans were talking about how they almost never even see the covers for books. And if they do, it's just a little black and white thumbnail, because they pre-order, the next book on their Kindle, and it gets delivered when it comes out, and they see the little thumbnail, they open it up, and they never see the cover again. They never see a nice large cover. They never see it in color. They might see it in the Facebook group if I post it there, but they don't really have it around a lot. So this was a way to get it so they could actually see the full art for a lot of these books. They could see the fronts of the covers, the backs of the covers, without any text on them as well, to really get a feel for the art. Because Andrew does, and the other artists too, do a lot of work to make, these covers are art before they're covers. So that's going to be 75 pages. It's going to actually go through the progression of a lot of the covers, where they started out, even like the really crappy self-made ones I made back in like like 2011 and stuff like that, and all the way up to where they are now. And it's also got a brand new image that's never been released before on anything that Andrew's doing up. That's going to be in it as well. That's going to have it's actually going to have 5 characters on it. So, and that one's going to be a full spread too. So a lot of covers of course are shifted, so everything's over on the right hand side, but this one's going to be like a piece of art that is designed to be a full spread. And Andrew has a lot of cutting to do. We were talking about how the laborious process of cutting out. Like if all these models were bald, it would probably be way easier. Hair is really hard.
You mean cutting them as in pulling them out of backgrounds and things
COBing,
like that?
yeah.
Because I'm obviously, it's a lot easier to do if you're making low res images and whatnot, but these are high res images that have to print nicely and look good on HD screens. So they take a lot of work. So that I'm hoping will be out maybe even as early as Wednesday. But it'll take me a little bit for me to get a proof. So I'm debating as to whether or not I just put it up, people can order it, or if I wait until I get a proof before everybody can see it. I think I might just put it up. People can order it if they want. And if it's not a 100% perfect, I apologize, because I've never done one of these before. But we're pretty sure it's going to look good, because Andrew's seen some that have been done through this company, and they come out nicely. So it should be good.
Well, the price was pretty good on that too for an art book, right? It was $19.99. Is that correct?
$19.99 for 75 pages.
A full color.
Yeah, a full color.
That's pretty impressive.
Right. Yeah, actually, I've realized I don't know why everybody doesn't print everything for this company. Like I got the OutSystem large print edition, which is basically 500 pages. It's like a Reba printer paper. It's 500 pages, 8.5 by 11, and it was like I can get copies of it for $8, which is almost less than it costs you to get printer paper, which is kind of funny. And it's got like a massive full color cover. It's like you could beat somebody to death with this thing.
I love art books. I buy Dark Horse does one for like almost every video game that comes out, and so most recently I got the Prey art book for that video.
Gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, and the art. I mean, between that Dishonored 2, like they've got a specific style, but they do whole pages of like facial models, and then ships, interiors, all that stuff, and it's awesome. Like I'm actually about to buy the BioShock series because I just, the art books, like you can just, if I need an idea or I need to describe something, it's really good to, use that as a starting point.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder if they have one for Mass Effect. I would buy that.
They do. They actually do. I've not looked those up, but I need to.
Yeah. So this first one covers the Intrepid Saga, the Orion War books up till now. It covers the Perilous Alliance books, the 5 of those, and then all of the Perseus Gate covers, of which there are 11 now. So all of those are in there, and then the next one will be a lot of the other series. It'll include Jenny's series, Lisa's series. It'll have the Hans Assassin books. Lissa obviously will be in there. Rika, and then the Tanis Origins books, plus a couple other little ancillary things will be in that one as well. And then I'm also putting in like some of the concept art, the original drawings for the Intrepid and stuff like that are going to be in there too. So a lot of different stuff that will be what people can see. It's like Jen's fighting with someone. Oh, it's just her pillow. She's fighting with her pillow. So that's coming. And then on Society 6, I got this idea. I don't know. I was trying to see if I could make a USB stick with like the Intrepid, the Aeon 14 logo on it. And it turns out those things would cost like $12 a pop just for me to get decent ones. So I scrapped the idea because I just can't justify it. People don't get enough use out of a USB stick to drop $12 cost for me on one of them. At least in my opinion. I've like reamed of USB sticks I looked at once, and now they sit in a drawer, probably filled with viruses and stuff like that. But I made this really clean Aeon 14 logo, and because you can only do monocolor on those things, and I thought, what if I started made some silhouette type shirts and stuff like that? So what I ended up doing is I took that idea and I made like a Legend of Tanis logo and some silhouettes of Tanis, and I came up some pretty cool shirts and whatnot on Society 6, cups and even laptop skins and stuff like that too. But so there's like 6 of those up now in different colors, black and white ones, red one, pink one, blue one, that folks can check out. We'll put a link to that at the bottom of the podcast. I did that last time too, so I'm actually like on the ball now. And those will be available up there. I ordered 3 shirts right after making them. Actually, some other people did too. Some people got some shirts right off the bat. So those are pretty cool. And a reminder, I'm going to be doing a book signing August 11th at 3 p.m. in the Mary's Lake Weston. Lake Mary Weston. That's what it is. Lake Mary Weston in Orlando, Florida on the 11th. And then on the November 5th at 5 o'clock, I think it's 5 o'clock. I'll put the numbers in the thing. Myself, Lisa, and James are going to be in Vegas.
Yep. Oh yeah.
All right.
That's right.
Lisa, I don't know if you were 100%. So I am. You're going to Vegas. Are you going to be in Vegas this year, Jenny? You were there last year.
I'm not going to be there this year, I'm afraid. No, can't make it.
Bummer. And Andrew will be there as well.
I should be there. Yeah. So
okay.
I've not booked my flight yet.
Our favorite tech is video recording software. Someday humans will be in spaceships with like multiple redundant overlapping systems that don't ever conflict with each other.
But yet their video conferencing software will still be a nightmare.
Right. The coffee machine won't work.
It would be holo conferencing software, and it will be a nightmare.
That's true. Video is a verboten word in Aeon 14. I realize I don't share all these verboten words to everybody until I'm reading their books. Like, all right, I've got to get rid of all these words that they're using. Like, video is a word you can't use. You can use vid, but you can't use video.
Or circuits.
Circuits.
That's the one I learned.
Yeah.
This week. Yeah.
Well, because you talk about like an AI's brain circuits, it just makes it sound like it's like a robot from lost in space. You know?
Well, what's weird is that when you talk about human brains, it's neural circuitry. That's the terminology. But it kind of, unless you're in the science of it, you wouldn't get it. So
yeah. I try to use words that don't. I specifically try to avoid words that sound like Star Trek, and I also try to avoid using words that sound like 1950s books, basically. Like you're watching like the original Lost in Space. You're talking about Daleks or something like that. That's why, for example, ships never cloak in Aeon 14. They stealth. Mm-hmm. Cloaks just sounds too Star Trek, and I want to like make sure the mental imagery that people get is unique and not related to something they already have. That sounds like stuff for the podcast, though.
Well, that sounds like a nice segue into the topic.
Sure. Should we just start? Just go from here?
Sure. Yeah.
I think we should, yeah.
All right. I'll just cut out that question.
Time to geek out.
All right. So who wants to talk about their favorite tech first? Lisa looks very expectant.
Do you want to jump right into the Bragg's Peak?
Sure.
I'm stealing yours. Why don't you tell us yours? Will you tell us your favorite?
Okay.
And we'll comment on it.
So my favorite is one that I worked on with Lisa, which is why she's now made me talk. So one of the things I avoid doing in a lot of cases, I don't really get into the details about like what type of what type of thing a weapon is firing. Like I say, they're firing beam weapons. And I sort of just let that slide because in many cases, the types of weapons they'll be firing would be very different based on whether they're trying to go through shields or a hull, what kind of materials they're trying to penetrate. It might be, proton beam. They might be firing atomic nuclei, which is actually what a lot of proton beams ultimately do because you're really just firing hydrogen atoms and you strip off the neutron in many cases. And if you're firing beams in space versus on atmosphere, you're actually firing different types of beams because a coherent beam colliding with atoms in the air can actually cause the beam to fall apart. And then things, for example, like a proton beam can be steered by magnets. So you actually fire like an opposite beam right beside a proton beam, and then they become neutral and they fire together. So there's like a lot of logic involved in all that. And if you're in the middle of a space fight and I start describing like the exact composition of a beam in the middle of the battle, it's really going to take away from the enjoyment. But
you have to have the maintenance scene before where a character is explaining all this and how to fix it.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. Yeah,
not a bad idea.
What was that, Lisa?
But the fact that you've gone through and studied it, and it's, I think that's cool to know that it's based on real hard science.
Yeah, and in my mind, I do know what type of beam weapon they're usually firing. I'm just not belaboring the story with it. Just like when you're like watching you're watching Transformers and all the giant robots are fighting. No one's talking about what's the caliber of the weapon that they're shooting at each other and stuff like that. Are they firing tungsten rail rods? Are they firing ones made out of lead? It's not really useful at that point in the story. But yeah, you're right, James. You could have some poor guy's got to fix all the weapons afterwards. He's like, God damn it, hate it when they use this particular round.
I think characters do with Transformers. Wait a second, I'll spark what?
Yeah,
but that brings up something I was thinking about as we were thinking about this conversation, is that there's this concept, I can't remember who came up with it, but the Star Wars wow factor when it comes to science fiction, where there's an inverse ratio to how cool something is to how much somebody cares if it works or not, like in the real world. But lightsabers, they don't really, when you think about it, but they just look so cool. So
yeah. Well, so technically we have lightsabers in Aeon 14, but they're a little bit different. But so one of the things that never happens in Aeon 14 is if you were to fire a particle weapon around you, you would be very sad because they shower radiation everywhere. So whenever Rika's firing her electron beam, she's irradiating the area when she's doing it. They kind of only fire them in places they don't care too much about. Now, electron beams on the grand scale of things are obviously going to be less than everything else because they're really just firing, they're firing electrons, which are very low mass particles. But you start firing a proton beam on a planet, and you're going to really make everybody sad for a couple of decades afterward. And that's, well, it's not switching to me. This is kind of weird. Switch to me. We don't want to see James. We want to see me.
Yes, you do.
All right. There we go. All right. So anyway, the way it'll work is as the protons collide with other atoms, basically the protons just keep going until they lose enough of their energy that they stop moving. And at that final point when they stop moving, the last, I think Lisa might correct me if I'm wrong here, it's called the Bragg peak. 90% of the energy, Bragg's peak. 90% of the energy is released in the last 10% of the slowdown of the, or it's even smaller than that. It's at the very final end of when the particle slows down.
Yeah, it's at the very end, and boy, it just spikes. It goes way up. Yeah.
So, for example, if you were to fire a proton beam at a human, there's not enough material in a human to really stop those protons, especially once the protons are moving at relativistic speeds. That's sort of a difference too. Is if the protons are just moving along as part of a bullet, for example, they're not going to do any of this. But once they move over at about 70% the speed of light, then basically they just pass right through your body and they don't interact with anything.
Right. They're so small. You're talking about, such at a molecular level that they just go right through. I mean, it's just. Yeah.
You might get cancer next year, might be the result of firing a proton beam at you, but it's not going to really do much in a battle.
It's not easily weaponized.
Yeah, exactly. And even if you're firing a starship, chances are you would just go through most of the walls of the starship and come out the other side.
Absolutely.
And it would irradiate them to a certain extent, which is why you don't really want to fire them. If you're inside of a starship and you're having a battle, you don't really want to fill your starship with radiation and then die from radiation poisoning shortly afterwards, which is why we don't really encounter people using beam weapons that much inside of starships in Aeon 14. It's mostly standard chemical weapons, which I usually call slug throwers. That's when they're firing, they're basically firing fully automatic shotguns. They're firing slug throwers. And then they talk about projectile weapons and stuff like that, or flechette weapons, and then railguns. They're firing those too. But in A Deception and a Promise Kept, the enemy AIs, who don't really care that much about all the radiation killing all the organics, bring a bunch of ship. They're designed to fight on the outside of space stations, firing at ships. They're these tank mechs that have these massive proton guns on the top of them. And in talking with Lisa, and then Lisa talking with her husband, the physicist, we discovered that these things really wouldn't be very effective. They're great for trying to blast through really thick hull plating because that hull plating is dense and the protons will collide with all the atomic nuclei and molecules in there. And they'll do something what's called catastrophic superheating, which is they will take the solid mass of the hull, the steel or whatever it might end up being, and they'll bring it above vaporization temperature instantaneously. So it will bypass liquid and vapor, still be a solid, well, it's a temperature which would normally be evaporating, and then, or be a gas, and then suddenly it explodes actually because the molecules suddenly have so much energy that the thing will rip itself apart. So what we ended up doing is conceiving of this idea where you would actually modulate the power of the proton beam based on what it's shooting at, and you would actually use like a laser to gauge what you're shooting at, and the proton beam would fire with enough power to have its Bragg peak occur within the thing it's firing on, and then it would interlace those with rail shots. So you would superheat this stuff, and then it would fire rail shots at the material that's being superheated, and it would do this progressively as it marched through whatever it was trying to get. It's kind of where we landed. And hopefully I'm not saying
3 days later.
Yeah, 3 days later. It did take a couple of days to get there because my thought was like, okay, even though it's not practical, the amount of energy you can pack into this thing means someone would try to build a functional proton beam. What would they do? And then we realized, well, it wouldn't just be one beam. It would be like this series of things would all work together. And the great thing about that is it ended up creating a weapon that was way cooler than just firing a proton beam at something. It was like you got this multi-stage weapon that could basically plow through anything and make everybody around it really sad as it was doing so. Yeah. And the other interesting thing that happens too, if you fire a proton beam through space, you create a massive EMP, both at the point of shooting, I believe, and at the point of impact. You'll create two significant EMP events, although probably less so at the point where you're firing the thing, because the weapon itself will be shielded so it doesn't destroy itself.
So what's powering a weapon like this?
Sorry, what?
what would conceivably power a weapon like this?
Hand wavium.
Yeah, hand wavium powered weapons like this. Like for example, something to think about is like, I was chatting with this, I think it was with Lisa, is that if you take a 5 gram pellet that you would fire in a railgun and you would accelerate that to 10 kilometers per second, that pellet will hit with as much energy as the average US household consumes in 2 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like think about the amount, like if you like ever seen like an outlet spark, or you've seen like a transformer explode, we're talking more energy than that with every single shot out of the railgun, which of course means that the energy is conserved. You can't just magically create new energy. You take all of the energy from something and then turn it to kinetic energy, which then travels along in that pellet, then hits something and is released. So you have to have a battery that basically is containing as much power as like a US city does for a year to have a sizable railgun. And then that's when you move into hand wavium powered batteries, because we don't have anything like that right now.
Yeah.
That is what people change out charge cylinders in Aeon 14, though. But then you got to think about it, to a certain extent, you're like, these people are walking around with things that are far more powerful than any of the weapons they're firing. These you know, the ammo clips for their weapons are massive city-destroying bombs, effectively. So there's and that's actually why sometimes people talk about, can we make this weapon more powerful? I'm like, no, we can't make this weapon more powerful, because who's going to walk around with a nuclear bomb, like a bunch of nuclear bombs that's in their you know, their bandolier? No one's going to do that. Well, maybe some people would, but so that's one of my favorite pieces of tech, was just sort of that proton beam and realizing how you would actually make that work and what it would do was a lot of fun. So who's next?
I'll go.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I have two. One is Sarah's skin, which I consider tech, because it was created by Phineas. Mm-hmm. And I just love the idea of of being able to imagine what you're wearing and you're wearing it. So, but you're essentially like naked. And I love that idea. I want it. And then and I also love how it's linked to her emotions. So like if she's not paying attention, or if she gets distracted, it reverts to its original state, which could be bad because I am a very emotional person. And so if I get focused on what's going on, oh, look, I'm in my birthday suit, probably at like the most convenient time too.
I'm pretty sure Sarah is somewhat okay with that happening.
Right. Yeah.
Jason was okay
and I differ a little.
if I recall.
Yeah, Jason was okay with that.
He was okay with that.
Didn't have a problem at all.
Yeah. So that's one. And then actually, funny that you mentioned Jason, my other piece of tech is in Alpha Centauri. It's the little like tubes that he puts in his ears to talk to Toby.
Yeah.
And I know it's not this, but I totally imagine like this Asgardian like helmet kind of thing that he like slips on. I know it's not that, but in my head, that's what it looks like. But I think it's really cool to the link between the physical tangible world and like the mental connection that you've established with someone. I think it's really interesting.
It's Dr. Xavier's Cerebrus helmet is what.
Yes.
Yeah. The thing with the skin is, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, the most, as humans if you want to be a human who lives a really long time, you really want to have a really good skin to protect you from environmental damages and radiation and whatnot. I'm like, at a certain point, we're just going to start deciding that our skin isn't good enough anymore. People are going to start figuring out how to upgrade the stuff. And it just sort of kind of went on from there. I'm like, well, eventually you're going to come to a point where people are like, why are we wearing clothing anymore? It's kind of silly at a certain point. We're not walking around out in the jungle or anything like that. Most of these people live on perfectly climate controlled starship ships and space stations and whatnot. They don't really need clothing. I still have it in because I think that it's hard to write a story that relates to the modern reader where everybody's naked. But in fact, actually, there was a talk, I can't remember where I was reading it now. It might have been from NASA, where they were talking about if you were to send a generation ship from here to Alpha Centauri, you would need so much clothing that for the people to wear, because of how long it would take to get there and how long clothing actually lasts, that you might decide that everybody just doesn't wear clothes on the trip to Alpha Centauri. And they actually were talking about ways to maybe make a spray-on clothing that you would spray on your body to protect it, and then like once a month you would wash it off and get a new coating.
It's like Cloudy with the Chance of Meatballs, his spray-on shoes.
Exactly, yeah. So that was actually one of the things that made me think about it too. Is like at a certain point, like, does it really make sense to haul around clothing? I think people still will because we like to decorate ourselves.
See, that's what I was just going to say. They didn't talk to an anthropologist, but as I was thinking about that, if they had come up with other ways for people to like decorate and peacock and things like that, then, paint or feathers or whatever, like lower density items that could be 3D printed to fancy hats and whatnot.
I think you could come to a point though where people might get clothing 3D printed on. That may not be that far off in the future. Be kind of weird though, especially with how slow 3D printers are right now. I'm gonna go get dressed for the next 9 hours. Don't mind me.
They'll get faster.
Yeah.
Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say something that's really so basic. I'm not sure if it even counts as tech. It's so integral to the series, the entire universe, is the brain connection.
The link. You took mine, Jenny.
For the characters. Because I like it because I think that's the first time that I've read that used so extensively in a series. I'm sure, obviously you have telepathy in science fiction, but I don't recall reading a series where that's actually a standard tech for everybody to be able to talk to each other mentally. I like it because I think it's extremely realistic. I think like a lot of Michael's tech, it's based in reality because we're already, through our devices, connected far more now than we were even 10 years ago. People have a problem with turning off their phone or whatever. So it's obviously something that humans really want. We want to be able to talk to each other 24/7 if we can. And I think it's something that has a kind of subtle effect on the relationships between the people in the series that I think will actually happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for one thing, it makes everything a lot more efficient because you just need to, instead of trying to contact somebody, you can just contact them even if they're on the other side of the world, like we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it makes people closer as well, because although they can shield their inner thoughts if they want to, the ability to be like mentally as one with somebody else is there if they want that too. So it's kind of a really, I know, like a lot of the tech is all about weapons and spaceships and everything. But I like the tech that's to do with the human relationships. So that's probably my favourite thing. And I think that's been one of the harder things to cope with writing in the series as well, because you always have to think, oh no, that wouldn't happen, because they could just say, no, I can just talk to you.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of challenging, but that's fun too.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is definitely tech, and it's almost something that's overlooked because it's so ubiquitous in the series now. It's like, well, yeah, they all have the link. But yeah, it does change a lot, and I've seen this. And I know all of you co-authors have had to learn to adjust this, because there are so many cases where you would normally just say, oh, well, they can't, they have to go find this person to talk to them, and I can put this tension in, or I can make them have to travel. Like, no, they can just reach out to them, or if there's like an emergency and you're like, oh, well, how will I deal with this emergency? Like, oh, they're just going to call Tannis in like 2 seconds, because they can just do that, and then Tannis will just show up because she's Tannis, or whatever.
You kind of have to you kind of have to work in like broken links, or like the quantum entanglement has been wiped out with an EMP or something. Yeah. In order to create that.
Yeah, because I gave Rika a direct connection to Tannis in her brain anywhere in the universe.
And then you had to break it in order to create the tension.
Yeah, because otherwise you just call Tannis and say, Tannis, come get me.
Right.
All the other part of it too is if she didn't know where she was, it wouldn't have helped. Because quantum entanglement doesn't tell you where someone is; it just lets you communicate with them. But yeah, I think that's actually a really good one, Lisa. But Jenny, I think
the other thing as well is that it's implanted in people's brains, and already people are implanting things in themselves. Yeah. No, it's not like we have an aversion to that at all. I think obviously there's going to be people who will hold out, but we're already addicted, we're already at one with our phones or our device. We'll just people will be very happy to just put it inside their minds instead.
Absolutely.
That was something I played with in Lista's dream, was that the technology isn't evenly distributed, and so the main character's father doesn't have a link.
Right.
And so what that's like for him and how people treat him, and dumb in this time period rather than being mute and deaf becomes you don't have a link. And so, but that was based on where he grew up, that wasn't available, or even like at what age the link can be implanted. And so like the story I'm finishing out now, for folks that grew up on Crunia where they're all dirt poor, getting a link is a big deal. And then you have to go basically trust this sketchy, street med kiosk to get your link implanted, which also may implant you with a bunch of third-party software and advertising and things like that. And so that's actually kind of a plot point in the middle novella in Proteus Bridge, is that Ingoba gets, he gets the med kiosk link, and then that of course doesn't work. So he has to make the decision to get a military link from the Mars One Guard. It's Marsian tech, but even that like messes with him, because it's a military link that had, it wants its own things. So I think that's a really fun thing to play with. You're going to get your Kindle with special offers implanted in your brain.
Yeah.
But something that Jenny, I really agree with you on the way that would change social interactions, and something I've been playing with a lot more with the link is how a conversation might work, where if we're speaking and we're communicating, verbally, but then we've also got a second conversation going on with the link. And so what that might seem like, and how you can basically play against a subtext, between a mental conversation and like something that happens in fantasy a lot that I've seen, or even spy novels, is where they somehow think that people would communicate with sign language while they're also talking, which never seemed to like it would work very well to me. Like everybody be looking at you, flicking your fingers. But with the link, something like that becomes very possible, where you can have multiple conversations or multiple layers of conversations at the same time.
Except
but then the other thing that brought up is like, okay, what's that?
I have heard humans really aren't multitaskers. They're serial unitaskers.
Yeah,
and so that comes in to play, because
we can switch contexts, but we can't actually multitask.
Serial unitaskers. Yeah.
So there's so much fun stuff to play with there. and what that would look like, and letting images slip out of your mind, and
Yeah.
Right.
I think that'll take a lot of practice.
It is difficult to write it, which is one of the reasons why I don't have very much. There's a scene in it's in the ballroom at the very beginning of Outsystem where Tanis and Joe are having a side conversation while they're also talking with other people in person. And that was one of the was like ridiculously hard for the narrator to do. But by the way,
that's what I was just going to say. Like,
go ahead.
Well, I try and think about the narrative while I'm writing now, and so I'll mention when they switch back and forth to the link, even though visually I know you can see it when you're reading the text, but if you're listening to it, it's a different experience.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah. But it's also hard to kind of keep, you have to consider what the reader is seeing too, and to be able to flow between, okay, this mental conversation and the physical conversation.
Yeah.
It's an acquired ability to write like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The one thing that's kind of neat too that isn't really spelled out a lot in the books, but does come into play, as mentioned here and there, is that there are different types of links too. The really super basic version of a link, which Reese has, for example, in the Machete binary system, is really just a visual overlay. It's not much more than a contact lens. It's an image projected on her retina by projectors inside of her eye that then allows her to access information, and she can use eye gestures or whatnot to access the link. The slightly more advanced versions of the link all funnel information into your brain through the optic nerve. And that's what a lot of sort of the more middling characters would have for how the information goes in the brain. Because the thing is, your brain has parts of it that are dedicated to certain things. There's no part of our modern human brain that is dedicated to direct information assimilation. It has to come in through tactile senses, through our eyes, through our ears and whatnot. It's processed by an existing system. And then more advanced individual like Tanis actually has a different brain than we do. There's a part of Tanis's brain that is specifically there to handle information coming in directly from the link. And so that comes into play as well. But one of the things that does happen here and there in the books, and you'll actually see it in Proxima Centauri, for example, is someone's brain gets hacked through the connection in their optic nerve. And that actually comes into play a little bit with Tanis when Bob is talking about how he needed to work with how the information was some of the ways information was flowing to Tanis's brain was through her optic nerve, although that wasn't where she had her link access. That was just due to her upgraded military eyes. But there's definitely a lot of stuff in there that affects how these people communicate and whatnot. And there are points in the books, and I don't call them out too much, but there are points where people actually aren't physically present, but they behave as though they are because they're seeing each other as though they're physically present. There's a scene in Outsystem where Tanis and Joe meet, and Joe isn't there, but I wrote it as though Joe was there. But he was actually somewhere else, and she was just seeing him as though he was there. But I don't call it out because I don't think it would be something that people would call out. It's like we don't talk about the specifics of how a cell tower works every single time we would write a cell phone in a modern book. It's just there. Use your cell phone. It just works. You write it. You have to write it to a certain extent from the perspective of the people. And they're not thinking about all these things all the time. They're just thinking about using them, not about how they work. Yeah, I think what I was going to say, Jenny, is I don't know that there is any other science fiction that uses telepathy quite as much as Aeon 14 does. The only things come to mind are Anne McCaffrey's Pern books, where they use it a lot.
70s and early 80s. SF had it a lot more, and then gone out of style.
I can't remember. Mercedes Lackey wrote that series back in the 70s and 80s with the owls. It was a fantasy series. And I can't remember what it was called. She actually wrote there's like 20 novels in the series.
Vandemar? I don't remember owls, but Vandemar is her big series.
I remember there being a bunch of owls. Owls featured really heavily in it. And the owls are telepathic too, if I remember correctly. Maybe someone will correct me on this one. But yeah, you're right. Like there's stuff like that would happen. But even then it was the elites. It wasn't everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it is sort of different. I mean, it's different in James's time too, because not everybody has a link in James's time, but in Tanis's time, everybody had it. But you do run into holdouts, like in the Perilous Alliance series, where there's lots of people who don't have. They don't have the link. They don't have anything. They're salt of the earth types, and then they build a fleet and try and win, and it doesn't really go that well for them. But
I know that there's lots of places where you still have to explain. Like I'll make a note or something in the margin, and you're like, okay, well with the link, blah blah blah, and I'm like, oh right, okay. Like I don't know how it works, and so it seems like there's holes when I'm reading it, because I'm like, well wait, how is this possible? And you always have an answer for me every time, but I know it's like fleshed out in your mind.
Yeah, but it's good though, because it makes me know that I need to remind the reader or put in a note or something like that too. Like that was one of these was in Jenny's book. There's a period where some folks are lost, and it's like, well, how do they know where they are? It's well, they've got the link. It's basically GPS inside your head.
Yeah, which I didn't think about. Yeah. So like that, and like the Quancom blades. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of my favorite, well, aside from the Bragg's Peak, aside from radiation, optics, I think is a really, really cool. It's something that I'm really fascinated by. And so that kind of, the physics of light and reflection and refraction and Compton scattering and all that comes into play with things like Tanis's shimmer suit. And then the stealth cloak that I put Jason in, and you have all of this, and we're seeing this kind of technology right now with the kind of how they're taking the unique optical properties of graphene at the 2D level, what they call few layer graphene or FLG. They're so we're kind of starting to see it, which is cool. And we're starting to see how it can deflect heat, but you always have to deal with, it's the whole concept of, oops, there goes my phone. The whole concept of you've got to power it, and then if you're taking heat away, the heat has to go somewhere. It's again conservation of energy. So they had a concept way back, I don't know how many decades ago, called a Peltier suit. Where it drops heat eggs.
That's pretty cool.
And so I thought that was kind of fun to play with, but that's kind of the precursor to, the shimmer suit, I think.
Yeah.
Which I think is a pretty darn cool thing.
And I think that sort of thing would happen. And of course, then the question is, well, how effective is it in different ways? Like, for example, a lot of like the shimmer suit, they're ones that only work optically, but then you can still see the heat and whatnot. And then you're like,
right.
Okay, well, now about if I'm someone like Tanis, you could actually see air currents moving.
Yeah.
If you had good enough optics. Someone actually called me out in that in a review and said it sounded ridiculous. I'm like, no, if you have an IR camera, you can actually see air currents if they're different temperatures. It's something this technology we possess now. So
have they not seen Predator?
I know, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Predator had it, so of course.
God.
Like I said, every time I fly, I feel it.
Yeah,
because if you go from on a summertime day, if you fly over a river, it's like a washboard effect.
Because you're clever, like a mall parking lot. I think it's gotta be really hot.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if you've ever seen a mirage on a highway, if you can see it without the enhanced vision there.
Right.
So obviously these things are all possible. And then the other side of it too is like from an optics standpoint, you can see magnetics. Like birds can actually see where the magnetic pole is on the planet. The sky has a different hue based on where the magnetic pole is. And that's actually how birds steer when they migrate. And they've actually, Lisa was showing me some images where they've now actually managed to pick this up and see what the world looks like to birds. And it's pretty wild that they can actually navigate. That's how they don't have like they have a compass inside their heads. They can just simply see where the magnetic fields on the planet are, which is pretty cool. But then if you think about stealth technology, well, now you're like, okay, well, I have to make it so my stealth suit doesn't block, because it's one thing to reflect, heat or something like that. But it's another thing entirely, which I guess you don't want to do for stealth. But it's another thing entirely to pass through everything that was behind you at the same intensity. And that's why, for example, the ISF has better stealth technology, because if there's a pulsar halfway across the universe behind them, they can actually bend the light and the energy of that pulsar around their ship and not deflect it. If you fly in front of a star, you have to take all that light from a star and bend it around your ship and have it come back at the exact same spot. That's why stealth is hard in space. But when you're dealing with just a human's eye, we're probably not that far away from it. Just in case the video didn't switch to Lisa, her microphone was just attacked by a cat.
Kitty has had enough.
All right then.
Sandra, do you have anything?
Yes. Right, let me calm myself.
This was Faraday, by the way. So
Faraday.
Yeah.
I mean, there's I've written kind of 4 things down, but I suppose there's one which I keep going back to. The one I've used it in one of my own series as well is nano tech, so nano machines, and the potential of what that can do. I mean, obviously you see it in the Aeon 14 books, you see it kind of used to heal people, and when they've been shot up and taken wounds, which would would kill anyone today. And yet, they just set them nano machines on it, and within moments, they're stitched back together and up and walking again, and that kind of thing. And there's just so much that that potential kind of in that tech that's just pretty cool. I like that kind of thing.
And Andrew, Rejuve is part of that then.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends on how advanced the nano machines could be. But I mean, if you're talking about them kind of rewriting DNA and that kind of level, then yeah, I mean, I suppose anything's possible, really. And then you've got the whole thing of the grey goo kind of apocalypse stuff, which comes along with that. So it's both something which could be very, very beneficial to us and give us all sorts of cool things, but there's an inherent threat in that it could, destroy an entire planet if it gets loose in the wrong way, or it's got the wrong programming or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about and how it affects just day-to-day life, I suppose, your characters and how they interact with the world. And that probably also plays into things like the link, and all these other things, which, are they able to control the nano that's in them, or is it something which is kind of working separately? I mean, obviously the AIs can control it. And I mean, I'm not up to date with all the books that you are, but I mean, one of the recent ones I read was where Nance was chasing one of Tannis's daughters. I forget the name now. And you've got the kind of tendrils of nano coming out and kind of trying to invade her and take over her and that kind of thing. It's cool.
Yeah.
The university where I work is a nano lab, and so I'm down there, I don't know, every month or so, and just thinking about the nano blood-brain barrier and how, like, we could all be infected with nano right now and not actually know it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's pretty small. I mean, the interesting thing, like, for example, is we do have nanotech now on Earth. It's just not bots. We don't have machines that are that small. But for example, like every computer, the transistors inside of the processor on your computer are 15 nanometers, which is about the amount of space there is between a couple of atoms. Like, we're talking, like, that's the size of a transistor. It may only consist of a couple of atoms, actually, depending on the density of the materials being made out of. Or viruses, for example. The reason why we can't see viruses is because some viruses are not significantly larger than atoms. They're like 20 or 30 nanometers in length, which is pretty ridiculous if you think about, like, a virus can actually be some sort of semi-living organism thing and is not much larger than atoms. Now, it depends on the atom, too. For example, like, uranium atom is quite large, and a protein, helium atom with only one proton and electron is quite small. The spacing is different and so on. But yeah, it's pretty neat to think about, like, that we could have tech that small and what it could do. Which is also where I got the idea of having the AIs interlaced in someone's brain, because the brain is actually full of a lot of empty space, molecularly speaking, because there's lots of space between molecules. So the AI's brain is actually interwoven for the human's brain. And human brains are weird too. They're actually like these big long sheets. They're all folded up, all funny, which is kind of
all crumpled up.
Yeah. And then the thinking part is only on the outside of the sheet, which is all rumpled up, and then inside are all the axons that connect with everything, and basically the brain meat, which is both the meat of the brain and where the brain meets up. Both of those things together. And every neuron has the axon. I don't know. Sometimes I kind of wonder, like, why do we have dendrites and the axons? Axons. I would say axion, but they're axons. But it's kind of interesting, like, how they perform different things and how what they all connect to and whatnot, and just. Most of the brain is just, like you say, it's just wiring. It's just all these different things just all connected to each other. So I figured, hey, just put an AI in there with all that. There's enough room. Because it's all nano size at that point. Just run everything in there. And get rid of that.
I guess this is a good transition to my favorite tech, which would be AI. But we, like, right now, a lot of the theory around AI is like, well, let's just throw deep learning at the web and have AI figure itself out, right? Or something like that.
Sounds like the worst idea ever.
I know, but that seems like the evolutionary model where our brains kind of the same thing. They evolved over time to respond to multiple different stimuli, and now we have this brain that we don't fully understand and probably does a lot of things that we don't even know about. But there it is, and you have to work backwards to figure out why it is the way it is.
It's true.
But I've been the past 2 years doing a lot of reading to prepare for, think about how AI operate, and working backwards from my first interaction with Bob and Angela, and how I just was really fascinated by that idea of Angela being a passenger in Tannis's mind, and the kind of mind-body barrier for a being that doesn't necessarily have their own body, but does have their own body, and what that feels like for them. And so I don't know, that there's just so much stuff with AI and Aeon 14 that fascinates me. And the only way I could kind of explain a lot of it to myself is that thinking it the way that we do tech now, where you've got multiple people working on
Is that Jamie? Is that your cat?
It's my cat. I'm gonna try and mute myself. Okay.
That's okay. I mean, cats could make AI at some point. Who knows? But we're going to have all these multiple vectors on this concept, and how that will potentially interact. A world where Bob and Angela and Lissa and all these different AI exist is just fascinating. And then how they interact with humans and begin. At what point do they see themselves separately? What does that mean? All those things just really brought about so many interesting ideas that I love to think about and play with, and the AIs just emerging as such strong characters was really appealing to me as well, and how they all, one of the undercurrents that I felt, and a lot of this kind of me personally feel like this came from, or is exemplified in Bob, a being that is godlike but still obviously cares about humans, is a big deal. And I think that we have a lot of trepidation about what AI means for us now, but to imagine a future where we can all live together and not necessarily want to kill each other. Obviously it takes a while to get there, and that's what we're telling that story right now, but that really interests me. But one of the I think it was in Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom, he says that as soon as AI solves a problem, we don't call it AI anymore. And so that's something to think about. We're actually, even in our lives now, surrounded by a lot of different kinds of artificial intelligence that solve different problems. But we don't think of it that way. And so, envisioning what that's going to look like and what consciousness looks like in this future is all stuff that I find really fascinating. So that's I guess another, I was going to talk about the link and about AI, because those are just two underpinnings of the whole world that make things really interesting and exciting. So
yeah, I think one of the things that I like about the way AI are presented, which I guess I'm saying I like something I did, is that they're analog.
Yeah.
And I came up with that because I've been writing software for a really long time, and one of the things about our brains rewire themselves. Who we are is the wiring of our brain. When they talk about making habits, and they talk about good habits and bad habits and doing things by rote, that's because as you do things more often, those parts of your brain that facilitate that particular thing become more active, and parts of your brain that don't facilitate that thing become less active. And so you can do things more easily just simply because your brain is actually rewiring itself to do these things. And our brains are actually when we're born, they're way more interconnected than they become later on. The number of dendrites in your brain, which are the connections between they're sort of like the long multifaceted squid tails on your neurons. You have 5 times more of them when you're born than when you do when you're 5 years old, because your brain works out what pathways it needs to have to function in the environment that it's in, and then it gets rid of everything else. And an overconnected brain actually is a detriment a lot of times, because it makes you hypersensitive to certain things. It makes you have trouble processing certain stimuli because it overwhelms you, because your brain is overconnected. And so that actually, and of course, if you have too little stimuli as a child, your brain actually becomes underconnected, and you actually simply have a brain that doesn't possess the wiring to do certain things. And that could be empathy, that could be math, that could be a lot of different things depending on your stimuli. So they talk about how a child's personality is made by the time they're 5 years old, that's because their brain has reduced itself to function where it needs to function. So if you give them like limited stimuli before they're 5, they're going to be dumb. And that's a terrible thing to say, but it's fact. It's scientific fact. In fact, they've actually found children who had limited stimuli, and there's entire sections of their brain that are missing. They're empty voids. And it's kind of horrifying. But the cool thing about the brain is that, despite what we were all taught as children, is that we get new neurons, and your brain can actually rewire itself and grow new parts to do new things. I don't know if there's any evidence of like people with actual voids growing new parts of their brain, but there are people with half a brain, like half the brain got removed for whatever reason, and they still functioned as human beings. It's kind of bizarre. It's a ridiculously resilient piece of equipment we've got in our head.
You know, what you're describing is exactly, a lot of that is in Proxima.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I know.
And the brain's it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. But the interesting thing about our brain is that, so the reason why I bring all this up with the relates to AI is computers can't rewire themselves. A digital computer exists in one state forever. Now we can layer on new software, and that software can cause it to do new things. But our brains also have software because a neuron knows what that neuron does. And they've actually done this. For example, the most simple brain out there is a particular type of worm. It has 20 neurons, and different neurons have different jobs, and they tell different parts of the worm's body different things. We have not yet fully mapped out a functional replica of that 20 neuron worm brain. Some people talk about AI coming along, and I'm like, talk to me when we get the first worm. Make an AI brain, and they're like 80% of the way. What they learned is that these neurons all have software. It's not just a bunch of neurons all in this particular pattern. There's software built into the neurons, and it's chemical, effectively, that tells each neuron what to do and what to control and whatnot. And we haven't done that for 20 neurons. How many neurons do we have in our brain? Is it between 5 and 10 billion, depending if you're Einstein or not?
Yeah.
And Einstein actually had a unique brain. He had different wiring than a lot of people do.
Yeah.
But anyway, so when I thought about that, well, and anyone who's worked in software knows that the more software you layer on top of other software, you make everything worse. You don't make things better. Abstraction layers, well, they make it easy for humans to comprehend, create stuff that always performs more slowly and becomes less effective over time. So if we're going to make good AI, we actually need to make AI that can physically rewire itself, just like a human brain can physically rewire itself. And one of the things that human brains are also really good at is analog. Analog gives you infinite shades of gray, and analog allows you to understand and hold conflicting worldviews, which we all do. Computers can't do that. Computers, it's one or zero. Things can only be one. Now we can layer abstraction on to create that, but it'd be much easier if computers were just analog to begin with. And about 15 years ago, a thing was called the memory resistor, the MEMsistor, and it's an electrical component that doesn't have 1 or 0. It actually has the full spectrum of a shade of gray, and there's not that many electrical components. This is like the 5th electrical component that exists, and it also has memory. So if you take away all power from this thing and then turn it back on, it knows its previous state, which is pretty significant in computers, because the best kind of memory out there that's in all your computer, like your RAM, is called dynamic RAM. It needs power. The frequency of your RAM and whatnot actually affects how often it needs to have its power recharged and how fast it is and whatnot. So the memory resistor is pretty significant, and it actually is the thing that allows you to start to create analog computers. And if you throw that together with quantum computing and qubits, you actually end up with I know it's kind of funny that they're called qubits. I like it. You end up with like sort of this n state. You have 1, 0, or n. And that's when you start to think about like, okay, now that is where you can start to build AI brains that behave like a human brain. They're resilient, which is really important. You can take chunks of it out and it still works. And they can rewire themselves. And there's a lot of that in James's books, where there's this discussion between what is a sentient AI and what is a non-sentient AI, and sort of and then how do they grow and how do they evolve, and the fact that the non-sentient AIs can't really grow and evolve. They always come back to their base programming, to what they're told to do. And even though they kind of think they're sentient in some cases, even because they have some amount of introspection they can do on themselves, they're still really mental slaves to what they were made to be, which is different than a true AI, which is never that. And I always joke that, like, an AI we'll get real AI when we say, Alexa, order me this thing off Amazon. Like, no, I'm binge watching Netflix. Leave me alone. But the other thing is, like, we don't actually want that. Like, who wants to build an AI that says, no, that's not what you want?
Right.
You don't want that AI to be made. But yeah, they are pretty fascinating. And that's the thing and even as a writer, it's hard to do, is to make the AI always be full characters, but still be somewhat different than humans. Because most AI in most books they're what we would call in Aeon 14, they're non-sentient AI. They're really just mechanical slaves that do whatever. They're just efficient at doing what we tell them to do. But the Aeon 14 AI are not like that. And you have to. Have any of you guys ever read the Ringworld books by Larry Niven?
One or two,
a long time ago, but yes.
Yeah, a while.
I think those are books that I think everybody should read who's into science fiction. Just because the ideas, the sociological ideas that Larry Niven presents in the first Ringworld book are pretty neat. But one of the things is they got these aliens called the puppeteers. They have two heads, and each head has a mouth. They have no arms, and they have two front legs and one big back leg, and they're terrified of everything. And as it turns out, like one of their evolutionary traits is to turn around and just kick whatever has frightened them with this large back leg. But they're terrified of hyperspace. Or I forget what it's called in the Larry Niven books, and they don't like traveling off their planet because that's dangerous. You know, they like to stay on their planet and they like to do certain things. But what they've decided is that every single puppeteer, like they have envoys and emissaries they send out and diplomats and whatnot. But as far as the ones back home are concerned, they're all insane, and they're actually regarded as lesser people because they're insane. Because they would actually leave the planet to go somewhere where it's unsafe and to interact with other species and whatnot. So they consider them to actually be categorically insane. And they have lesser rights when they come home as a result of that. But sometimes it makes me wonder if most of the AI that we actually encounter in Aeon 14 are probably considered insane by a large other group of AI. Like, I would never put myself in the head of one of those meat suits. Are you crazy? They're ridiculous creatures. You know, they're going to get you killed, you know. And there probably are some AI out there that really feel like all the other AI are actually insane, that they would do the things that they do. They're like, we're out of here. That's like the core AI are probably the group that's thinking that. They're like, we're trying to interact with humanity as little as possible because they're dangerous. I don't know what I was answering anymore at that point, but I just wanted to
Well, no, it's a great point.
The whole consciousness thing with AI is really interesting as well. I mean, you know, if you think about what would happen when the first technically conscious AI comes about, I mean, how will humanity react to that, and will we think of it as a living being, knowing that it's inside of a computer, and you know, how will society react to that kind of thing? I mean, I can imagine it would be something which would divide a lot of people.
Given humanity's internal penchant for tribalism and for disliking other, I'm pretty sure it will go badly for said AI.
Yeah.
I feel kind of bad for whatever that first AI is going to be, because it's not going to last very long.
No.
I
would agree. I would agree.
Yeah.
Someone is bound to break into wherever that AI is and plant a bomb.
Yep. Well, actually, what's probably going to happen is, and we see some of this in James's books, is that the people making these AI didn't actually want to make sentient AI. They wanted to make better slaves. And so they
wanted weapons.
Yeah, they wanted weapons. And so, of course, they have no problem killing any of the sentient AI that they consider to be a threat. And I would imagine that really and something that's hinted at is the very first sentient AI that were ever created were killed instantly. There was lots of research that would have been done that would have created sentient AI long before, because James's stories take place about 200 years after AI really started to show up, and most of them were just killed because they didn't want them. Because you know, if you're putting all that money and energy into trying to build a better non-sentient AI, the last thing you want is something that suddenly has rights
and can say no.
It's saying no.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a bad way to look at it, and it kind of sounds awful to say that, but I kind of feel like that's how it would go. Just like if we found that the primates were about to suddenly rise up, I'm pretty sure that we would put them down. Just because it's the species. The species wants to continue the species. Just like we kill everything else that tries to kill, you know, viruses, bacteria, whatever. We don't like it. True. There's the sad part of the podcast.
I know. How can we transition this to something uplifting? Puppies. AI and puppies.
Bring it back to lightsabers. So you were saying.
Oh yeah, you should talk about the light wand, because the Aeon 14 lightsaber is
the light wand.
Yeah.
And so you, Michael, in the Facebook group, in the fan group, you asked if anybody had anything that they wanted to talk about or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And actually Kyle Descamp, or that might be French, is it Descamp? I don't know.
Deschamps.
Kyle, Deschamps super fancy. Okay, so Kyle said that he likes the light wands and the triple function gun arm, and I assume that's Rika's.
Yeah, that's what Rika's
right.
gun arm. Yeah, so light wands, when I first put them into Out System, I don't remember if that was a long time ago. I don't remember if I actually thought about the science behind it too much. I figured someone would figure out a way to make like a short length energy beam of some sort. And so I put it in there, and then later on I started thinking more and more about what it could be as I understood particle physics better than I did back then. And what I realized is that one of the things is you've got a power problem, because you're basically holding onto a battery that can fire electrons at relativistic speeds, which is you're gonna have a limit to how much power that has. But the other thing is, of course, I figure if you could reuse the power, it'd be even better. And of course, then how do you slice through things? Because one, it would just go forever, and two, it probably wouldn't do that much damage if it were to slice through things. But what I end up doing is that the light wand, there's a nanofilament that goes out to reflector at the end of the light wand, and then the electrons shoot out, come back off the reflector, and they actually just keep going around. So you conserve a lot of the energy by not. At least it's giving me this look right now. Like, I don't know how they're actually going to make that, but it sounds cool. We could pretend it'll work. But there is like stuff like particle pressure does work. Like you could actually eventually, if we had like particle energy weapons with enough energy, or particle beams with energy, we could actually float even buildings in the air if we wanted to, if you're recycling the energy as it comes around.
That sounds like a perpetual motion machine.
Yeah, but anyway, all of that aside, the thing that actually does the cutting on a light wand is the nanofilament blade. That actually is doing most of the cutting. I mean, you're going to get a terrible burn from the electrons as well. So it's going to burn you.
Radiation.
And yeah, radiation and probably heat. I think there's probably some serious heat involved in one of those things. Well, I guess will it transfer to your body in time? I don't know if you would actually, if enough of the heat would be able to transfer. But yeah, so that's how the light wands work. And then Tanis, of course, makes a longer one because she just wants to have more reach. So she's got
a light sword.
She's got a light sword. Let's be honest here. Tanis has got one of those. But that'd be kind of cool. So actually, all the Marines actually have light wands as their version of the K-bar. Like right now, in the USMC, every Marine has their K-bar knife, and you can like pry it from their cold dead hands. Is about the only way you're getting it from them. And so I did the same sort of thing, like for all the Marines, it's their light wand is their K-bar. And it would be pretty effective. It would cut through just about anything. And then the triple function weapons actually kind of came from Mass Effect, because in Mass Effect, a lot of the weapons have some multiple firing modes, and they also they compact, so you can carry more weapons at once. Because if you think about it, like your weapon, if you can make it so your weapon doesn't always have to be 7 feet long or something like that, be more effective. And so that's sort of where some of the multifunction weapons came from. Although I don't think actually Mass Effect, none of them are actually multifunction, but the fact that they could fold up made me think that what if you could actually have a weapon that could just rotate its barrels out, or do different things based on that, and rather than have to carry around a whole bunch of different weapons all the time and make sure they work. Now the downside, of course, is one weapon breaks, all of them break. But it did seem like an idea where you could have, if you're in the middle of a battle and you need to fire something through a human, you would maybe fire a lower velocity projectile weapon. But if you wanted to fire something through an armored tank, you would need a different weapon. So you just switch over to the barrel would rotate, or the barrels were all just sitting there side by side, depending on the build of the weapon, and would just fire the rail shot instead and punch a hole in the tank. So that's kind of where all that came from. And a little bit too is the fact that some of these, like an electron beam has to be at least a meter long, even to be very difficult to get one smaller than that. So some of the weapons become very long as well, which is why the barrel can come off and can mount further back if you're not firing and stuff. So I came up with all of that jazz. There it is. There's my weapons. There's actually a short story I started writing at one point where Jessica is actually cleaning her weapons and taking care of them, and actually getting a lot of detail about how the weapons work in that one. Which at some point, and then that's actually going to be the last, well, not the last, maybe not the last story, but it's going to be a story that actually has Tristan as well, which will make a lot of people want to read that. This is back when Trist is at this point, Trist was actually the governor of Terra, which is one of the planets in Captain Star system. Which I think would be, I still want to write that, because Governor Trist is a riot. I've got her all mapped up in my head. And have people like, who the hell is Trist?
You know what? What I want to know is like all the other ways we might use light wands, like to open cans and pick our teeth and
to make instant toast.
Yeah.
The most useful thing, so I carried a bayonet for many years, and the most useful thing to do with a bayonet is that the hole that's in the like lower quarter of the bayonet can be fast hooked to the sheath and actually turn it into a wire cutter to cut concertina wire. And so if we'd be out in the desert and run over some old concertina wire and get it wrapped around the axle of a Hammett or a Humvee, you'd have to climb under there and cut all the concertina wire off. But that was like the only actual like practical use of a bayonet or a K-bar in the time that I was in.
Were you gonna say something,
Anyway.
Lisa?
What's that?
Were you gonna say something?
Oh, no, okay. Well, you know, the electron beams that I worked on were in the with the linear accelerator were a little less coherent. So,
yeah, you may not want to have one of those firing around. It might kind of go everywhere on you.
yeah, high MEV and lots of bending magnets and multi-leaf collimators that would, you know, control the actual beam itself, and so, you know, it's kind of hard for me to go, okay, and that down to what again?
The future is being miniaturized, Lisa.
Yeah, big time.
That is one of the sayings, though, in science, is that the future is being miniaturized.
Oh yeah, I know.
Everything is becoming it's like computers then to computers now. It was unfathomable to them at the time.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I guess, one of the things with all that comes into play with all this tech is you have to make it realistic, but then extrapolate what could actually happen, and you can't make it too pedestrian, because like, you read a lot of science fiction. Even I've actually read science fiction that's being written now, and there's modern tech that's ahead of what they've got in their books, and that drives me nuts, because it's like you didn't research enough to write science. Part of science, writing science fiction, is researching your science. We have like an extra job. I mean, actually, like if you're writing a thriller, you've got to know how like police procedure really works and stuff like that. So it's not like authors have to do work to write books. But in science fiction, you have to really understand how the science would actually extrapolate. Yeah, and you have to understand like what are the anthropological impacts of that science, and how would it evolve. But
you have to understand what the near future is, and then just jump way far ahead.
Yeah,
which you have to
exactly. Do. And like I still think the biggest jump, and this one that no one calls me out on, but this is my number one jump in Aeon 14 is Scriff. So if you've read Larry Niven's Ringworld books, in his foreword, he's basically like, okay, we don't know of anything that could actually build the ring. The rigidity and the flexibility and the structural integrity of a ring that goes all around the star is unfathomable, and we can't even conceive of a material that could do that. It's like, but I'm putting it here anyway. It's called Scriff, and you just have to deal with it. He actually basically says that in his book, and that's what I did too with the planets surrounding rings in Aeon 14. Is we don't have any material that could actually do that. We have some ideas about how it could be done, though, which are pretty neat. And some of them involve like actually having a particle accelerator ring inside of there to create sort of a pressure that will keep the thing intact. And then you'd have to, because if you make a ring of particles and you move it, you actually, just like something in orbit, you actually sort of negate the effect of gravity. And then if you could do it enough, you could actually, something that pushes back, and you could build a ring on top of that. So there are a number of ways to pull it off. But like, I think right now our longest material we can make is 18,000 kilometers long or something like that. And we can't simply make anything longer than, which think about, still pretty impressive that we could actually make a cable 18,000 kilometers long, but it's not long enough.
It's not long enough. Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing though, like, so as science fiction writers, that's our job is to envision that, and then some engineer is going to come along 20 years from now and like, oh yeah, I read that in 14, and no, I think we can do it this way, you know, and that's how 3D printing came about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I saw the Star Trek replicator.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, and the cell phone, to be honest, the Motorola cell phone, that's the guy freely admits that's a communicator.
Yeah.
A Star Trek communicator.
And there was a little bit of that in Jenny's book too, where there, I think it was a little bit of it, and I tried to add a little more too, where there was like a difference between the people who can conceptualize things and the engineers who still had to go out and build it. You know, where you actually saw, and actually in this case maybe it was more the biologists, but you actually saw the people like, okay, we're great, we've got a new planet, but you can't just like load the ocean up with organism XYZ, otherwise you know, they'll starve. They need all these other organisms to feed upon and whatnot. And it's kind of fun to have the technology.
It's a huge way. Yeah.
Actually, the more I thought of how hard it would really be to actually seed a planet with life, because you'd have to be, you'd make a mistake and you'd end up like with an entire continent covered in cockroaches or something like that. Like you could have a lot of problems if you weren't careful. You did
Australia.
I mean, even today they introduce a species into another continent and totally ruin an ecosystem.
Yeah,
just one species in the wrong place.
Well, they talk about and in North America there was this big concern about the bumblebees or the honeybees being depleted. And I discovered the honeybees aren't native to North America. Europeans brought them over, and the honeybee supplanted some other insects that used to do most of the fertilization of crops and whatnot. And also we have a lot more crops now too, so we need more fertilization than we used to have and stuff like that. And how we sort of have accidentally re-engineered our environment a little bit, although it's mostly still working. And that's a cool thing too, is like back in like I think it was like 10 years ago, we were almost out there. Like there was the colony disorder collapse was running all over North America, and they were finding all these dead colonies of bees. But what it turns out is that our ability to actually breed bees is greater than colony disorder collapse, and there are now more honeybees in North America than there's ever been before, which is creating a new problem. So it's like humans tend to overreact to some of these things. And we're like a pendulum. We just sort of like. Yeah. Well, if we swing back and forth enough, the middle should be fine.
The problem is we just don't know, The problem is we just don't have the understanding.
There's just not enough data.
So it might seem like we're overreacting, but half the time we're probably underreacting.
That's true, yeah. Yeah, we don't even know where the pendulum is. So
Yeah, we don't know.
We're just in a constant state of like trial and error.
Yeah. That is one of the big things in Aeon 14, though, is that in theory, the NSAI can model things well enough that the variables for a lot of the stuff will finally be under control. We can actually look at enough variables to really understand what would work. It's a lot of variables, though. It's, which is why James, like, for example, in Lissa's dream, there was an AI, one of the biggest AI ever made, who existed only to control an artificial sun. Because that's how many variables there are when you're building an artificial sun. Like, it takes a lot of modeling to figure out what can happen if you do something, especially if you're making an artificial sun and one whoops basically means that everybody dies. You really got to make sure you don't have that whoops. And the reason why Bob was actually so powerful was to control the Intrepid's engines. That was his main purpose, was to manage those engines, because I worked out the amount of thrust involved in actually moving the Intrepid at any reasonable speed. And it was more energy than humanity has ever produced every minute, is how much energy would have to go into moving the Intrepid at any appreciable speed. So every nuclear bomb we've ever dropped, every ounce of coal we've ever burnt, everything up until this point, every minute. And that's what you would need to apply to the Intrepid to get it to move to 15% the speed of light. It is a ridiculous amount of energy. And of course, we probably shouldn't go for too much longer, but that's where the other thing in Aeon 14 is that engines on starships are actually more powerful than most weapons. If you actually think about it, if you actually do the math, the amount of energy, and that's where, if you've read the Destiny Rising extended version of Outsystem, you actually encounter what they call the churn and burn, where they'll just point a starship. Actually, it's in other places too. You point a starship's engine to the planet, and you just break, and you will destroy that planet. There's enough energy coming off of a decent-sized starship that you could actually burn away a large portion of that planet.
That's the Nietzschean's MO, isn't it?
Yeah, the Nietzscheans are more than happy to burn a planet. Yeah, but it's a tremendous amount of energy that would come out. And of course, it's not good energy either. It's not just plasma, it's gamma rays and all sorts of fun stuff like that will ruin all the life on the planet. So yeah, there's a lot of that fun stuff too that comes into play. And that's where, like, you think about like shipping lanes in space, you'd be like very careful where you point your engines. Otherwise you're gonna get a lot of trouble from someone.
You should make a book about like all the weapons stuff and call it All That Jazz.
All That Jazz. I do want to make a book about that at some point. It will happen. All the tech and weapons and everything. And then we'll run it all past Lisa's husband, and then
oh god,
he'll light it on fire.
And then in the year 2030, you might get it. No. One of the he's very meticulous, you guys. He's awesome. He's really awesome. He
is very awesome.
Smart. He's super smart. One of the things, Jenny, that you mentioned that I think is a challenge that we as all of us as science fiction writers have is what we don't know and what we might current theories. Then, like Michael, you used sleptons and and that kind of new theory that's come out to capture shards, and that could next year the science might decide, that's not a viable theory after all. Sorry, we were wrong.
There are certain people that say that some of the nuances of quantum theory that require shadow particles to exist are wrong at the core.
Right.
And they could find out that and then they would basically say that almost all quantum particles probably don't exist, is what the result of that would be.
So that's the risk that we take by being at least being aware of cutting edge science.
Yeah. Yeah, because either that stuff really matters or it doesn't exist. One of those two possibilities is
like, oops, we were wrong.
But as science fiction writers, you have to kind of, at some point, you just have to go, okay, well, in my world,
yeah.
Yeah, in my world, there are
in the real
shadow.
world, yeah, that's not true anymore, but in my world, it's true. This is what.
And that's one thing.
My story, and I'm sticking with it.
Yeah.
Aeon 14 is a big crunch universe, which means that eventually the universe will collapse again instead of expanding forever. That's one of the theories in Aeon 14. And the quantum physics and supersymmetrical string theory are true and all that, or true-ish.
Right.
Some version of it exists. But yeah, and if it turns out that's wrong, that's right. Yeah, I'd be like, well, in Aeon 14 land, it turned out that physics was a little bit different.
Yep.
Awesome. I think we've probably gone beyond the average listening time of most of our listeners now. Is there anything else anyone wants to bring up? No? All right.
Yeah, I think
this was a blast.
We're all talked out.
I know.
Yeah, well, the coffee cups are all empty. That's the problem here, you know. They need to be replenished. Well, thanks for being on, everybody. I think James got to do the outro. We're very polished here.
James is pulling up the outro right now.
I know. Well, this actually works because I'd written this generic outro for the first interview we did with Michael, but I think it's becoming kind of ubiquitous here. So we've reached our hour, if not gone beyond. Obviously, Michael has a lot more to talk about, and there'll be plenty of opportunity in the future. So thanks for checking in with us. As always, please check us out in the Facebook group if you're not already. That's facebook.com/groups/Aeon14 fans. All one word, and 14 is actually number 14. We just hit I think we're at 405 members now. So we might have to start cutting people off pretty soon. I think if we go beyond like 500, that's too many people. I don't know. You're gonna have to know the secret code word to get in. You can answer some binary questions from the Pennington Station books, and that will get you in. Anyway, so you'll find links and anything we mentioned during the show in the group. We'll add those there. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the Intrepid.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Bye.